Growing mulberries from air layers is amazing. You can grow plants as healthy and vigorous as these two in about 12 weeks. In this video, I'm going to show you the process. I'm going to show you the root system on the bottom of these two. These are about 12 to 13 weeks old, and I'm going to give you some tips to make sure that your air layering is successful. So if you're using alfoil for your air layer, then branch thickness isn't really an issue. I'd go bigger than pencil thickness and as thick as you like. The big factor that will restrict the branch thickness will be how much growth is above that, or how much growth above that you're going to keep in your air layer. So you only want about 50 centimeters of growth above the point at which your air layer takes place. Alternatively, if you're using air layering pods like I am in this video, the diameter of your branch will be determined by the width of the opening at the top and the base of your air layering pod. Small leaves and twigs might get in the way of your air layering pod closing. So here I've removed 2 branches to make sure that my air layering pod will seal. You need to do the same thing if you're using alfoil. The next step is to make your incisions in your trunk for your air layer. So my first step in doing this is to grab a knife, and I'm just going to run my knife around the outside of my mulberry branch. And that cut will be just through the outside layer of bark. And that's where our sugars travel up and down the plant. Then all I'm going to do is just below that, a couple of centimeters. It's going to do the exact same thing. Pushing nice and firmly, just removing, so I can remove that outside layer of bark. And then we're going to cut a vertical line between these 2 layers. So push fairly firmly. Okay, once I've made that vertical incision, I'm just going to peel that layer of bark off. So you may be able to grab it with your fingernail, you may need your knife to remove it. So all I've done there is remove that outside layer of bark, and you may not be able to see it, but there's like a white sappy substance on the outside. So on the outside of your branch, you've got your phloem cells, or you've got your phloem. Your phloem cause the sugars to move up and down the plant. So by removing this section, the sugars produced in the leaves will come down the plant. They get to this particular section of the plant and they will not be able to travel any further. So the sugars will mix with the hormones in this particular part of the plant, and they will callus up, and then you'll start to see roots spring from the outside. So I'm just going to score the outside, make sure we've got all of that removed. Okay, our plant's still going to get sufficient water because the xylem vessels are in this center layer of wood material, and that water moves in one direction up the plant, so it's able to move up. And our sugars normally move up and down the plant, but like I said, our sugars will stop at this particular section. So what we need to do from here is grab our air layering pod. We're going to fill that up with some damp potting mix or seed raising mix, and we'll just wrap around this joint. Your other way of doing it is, if you don't have the air layering pod, you could do any size branch as long as you don't have too much growth on top. And with the alfoil, you just place your seed raising mix or your propagating mix in your alfoil, and you'll just wrap tightly around your incision in the branch, or your ring barking of the branch. So as you can see, my air layering pod is now full of propagation mix. I've wrapped it around the outside to make sure it's not too full. You want that potting mix pushed nice and close to where the incision's been made on the branch. So as you can see here on the bottom, there are two little tiny teeth to show you the bottom part of your air layering pod. These two teeth will grip onto the branch as I wrap them around and seal it. So all you're going to do is wrap around nice and firmly so that the potting mix is right up against the trunk, and then you'll just use the little clasp on the outside of your air layering pod to close it up. If you're using alfoil, you'd wrap and twist at this point to make sure it's sealed in, because you don't want to lose water via evaporation. And that can happen around the top. It can also happen around the bottom or the joins around the side. So this join on the side here will open back up after a few weeks just to look for root growth. You need to be really gentle on these seams when you open them back up, because you don't want to disturb or damage the roots. But this will be really healthy for the roots. To identify the roots, they'll take about 6 to 12 weeks. 6 weeks initially, but 12 weeks till we can finally chop it off. So I've just opened this air pod up just to see what we've got. Now I've previously opened it to see if the soil would hang over or hang on based on the root ball. And we've got some nice root growth all around the bottom. Unfortunately, when I took it off, we lost a bit of soil off the root ball. We've got some nice root growth there, and similarly on the backside. So it's really important now that when I cut it off, I make sure that I am giving the plant enough water, because when I do cut it off, it will have been constantly supplied water through the centre of the plant, and now it's no longer going to be getting that. So I need to make sure when I pot it on, my soil is nice and damp, possibly overwatered just for the first week or so, so that it's getting the water that it needs, but I don't want to drown the roots. So let's keep the potting mix damp. I'm going to cut that off at the bottom and pot that one up. So inside this pot, I've got about a third of the pot full of potting mix, enough for me to place my root ball in and still add potting mix to cover the base of the plant. I might put a little bit more in. What I'm going to do is I'll add potting mix around it. I'll give it a good solid soak so that the soil settles, or the potting mix settles around the roots. And then what I'm going to do is, over in this pot, I've just got a small amount of water, in this bucket, a small amount of water. So because the plant has relied on water through the xylem, or the vessels in the middle through the stem, once I've cut it off, it's going to rely on the roots. So I'm going to place this inside just for the first week or so, so it will wick water up, so that there'll still be plenty of opportunity for it to remain damp, and it's not going to dry out, and our root ball won't dry out. So now I'll add some potting mix to the plant. I'm going to push firmly around the plant to make sure it's stable, and then what I'm going to do is give it a good solid drink and put it in the bucket, as I mentioned earlier. So this is the final result. As you can see, they have really well developed roots on them. To make that happen in your air layer, do not let your air layering pod or your air layering ball wrapped in alfoil to dry out. This will stifle root growth in your air layer. So that's super important. The other tip for you is seed raising mix is a great option as it maintains or holds moisture. Sphagnum moss or coir peat are recommended, but they're probably not the most sustainable option. So use coir peat, which is coconut husks, or seed raising mix will get the job done.